We find this around verse 16. This is what you asked your everlasting God to do at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, "Never let me hear the voice of the everlasting God, or see this great fire again, or I'll die." Then the Lord said to me, "What they've said is all well and good. From their own brothers, I will raise up a prophet like yourself. I will put my words into his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. Anyone who refuses to listen to my words spoken by him in my name will have to render an account to me. But the prophet who presumes to say something in my name, which I have not commanded him to say, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet must die." So, they're expecting a prophet like Moses. They're not expecting God. They're expecting a prophet, a man. He says, "I will raise him up from among your brothers." Now that's one thing they're expecting. Every false prophet will die, but it's not said specifically of that special prophet that he will die. And therefore, by the kind of reasoning that is typical of Jewish rabbis of the time, it was a tradition in Judaism that that prophet, that special prophet, would not die. That he would never die. In John chapter 12, 34, you read about that tradition. There are some people who were about to believe in Jesus, but he was saying, "I'm going to be lifted up, crucified, and then I'll rise from the dead." And they say, "What's all this about being crucified? We know from the law that the Messiah will never die. He goes on forever." So they were confused about that. They expected someone who would not die. And when the Pharisees came to John the Baptist and he was baptizing, they said, "Why are you doing this?" And then they asked him 3 questions. "Are you the Messiah?" He said, "No." He said, "Are you that prophet?" That's who they're talking about, the Deuteronomy prediction prophet. He said, "No." "Well, are you Elijah?" "No," because they expected Elijah to come before the day of the Lord, which was another expectation. Because all through the Old Testament you have stuff about the day of the Lord is coming. And they were looking forward to that because the day of the Lord was usually coupled with God's promise to destroy their enemies and put them back on top. Isaiah 2:12 is one of the first places that you read about the day of the Lord. And it says, "The day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up, he shall be brought low." That's what they were expecting. They were expecting the Romans will be brought low, the emperor who's calling himself a god will be brought low, everybody who's exalting themselves will be brought low, and all the people who lorded it over the poor all be brought low. And if you remember that when Gabriel spoke to Zechariah about John the Baptist, here's what he said. He said, "He will prepare for the Lord a people fit for him." And then Mary understood what Gabriel had said to her when she spoke to Elizabeth, and she said, "He hath shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in their imagination of their hearts. He has put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. He has filled the hungry with good things. The rich he has sent empty away. He hath helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy." So this was part of the tradition of the day of the Lord, was going to take all the bad guys and really bring them down. Now that was the day of the Lord. But there are other things said about the day of the Lord in the Old Testament, and this affected their expectations. By the way, before going any further, I want to tell you that the bottom line of this message today, and of every Christmas message, is good news, a happy ending. I want you to understand that however this comes out, if we get it right, it's going to mean you're going to say, oh, good. And you're going to be relieved and delighted that it's going to come out well, because that is what God is going to do. The essence of what we're told about what we're still looking forward to is that it's going to be beyond anything you could ask or think. It's going to be better for you than you can imagine. It's going to be worse for the bad guys than anything you can imagine. It's going to be absolutely fabulous and perfectly just. No one will have any hesitations. No one will have any reservations about it. I don't know. I don't know if I like the fact that he's going to judge people who, after all, may have had a terrible childhood. No, God is going to get that right. He's going to do exactly right. Exactly right. That terrible childhood thing is true. And God knows that. He knows all about that. And he's the judge of all the earth. He'll do right. It's curious that people imagine that somehow God will overlook these things, or he won't take everything into account. He will. He'll get it absolutely right. Now, having assured you that we're going to have a happy ending, I must tell you that the rest of the Old Testament painted a picture of the day of the Lord, which was going to be good news for Israel, but bad news for practically everybody else in the world. All of their enemies. Joel writes about it. Alas for the day of the Lord is at hand. A destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm, let the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming, it's at hand. And the Lord will utter his voice before his army. His camp is very great, he's strong, he'll execute his word. It's very terrible, who can abide it? The sun will be turned to borrowed blood, darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, the day of the Lord is near, the valley of decision. Woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord. To what end is it for you, the day of the Lord? It's darkness, not light. Shall not the day of the Lord be darkness and not light? Very dark, no brightness in it. These are the kinds of things the prophets have to say about the day of the Lord. But it was all going to be dark for their enemies. Until one prophet, Amos, says, oh, and it won't be great for the rotten people among you either. So they have this mixed vision of what's going to be the day of the Lord. The last one is Malachi, the great and terrible day of the Lord. It says, but before it comes, I'll send Elijah. So that's why the Pharisees asked, are you that prophet? Are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah? And he said, no, I'm not any of those. I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. So Mary expected that the bringing down of the proud was a part of what she had just been promised. Gabriel, speaking to Zechariah, gave him the same impression. Now, what happens when God decides to come in person? I don't think there's any doubt of the fact, and I don't think you can be in any doubt of the fact, that God was continually adjusting his plans on what to do. That's implied in the parable that Luke tells in Luke 20. Where he says, now here's what the whole thing is like, Jesus says. It's like a man who had a vineyard. And he made a beautiful vineyard and gave it to tenants to run, and they would enjoy it. But he wanted some of the fruit of his vineyard. And he would send a messenger, and they beat up the messenger, insulted him, wouldn't give him anything, mocked others, killed some. So he is thinking now, what shall I do? His basic plan had been to send the messengers and that the people would respond. They did not respond. So he's making adjustments.